Today's episode is going to take us somewhere unexpected, somewhere sacred, a little mysterious, and surprisingly powerful. We're talking about saints. Now, I know that might not be the first place your mind goes when you think of power or mystery or anything particularly wild. But stick with us, because behind the golden halos and the centuries-old stained glass, there are stories that are deeply human and sometimes completely mind-bending. In the Catholic tradition, saints aren't just admired for living good lives. They're believed to be in heaven, still at work, still listening, and still somehow connected to the world in ways that are hard to explain. But becoming a saint, that's a whole process. It's not a popularity contest or an honorary title. It takes years, sometimes centuries, of investigation, testimony, and yes, miracles. To be canonized or officially declared a saint, you need more than a holy reputation. You need documented, verifiable miracles, and not just warm, fuzzy feelings or lucky coincidences. We're talking cases so extraordinary, they hold up under scrutiny from doctors, scientists, and skeptics. Scattered throughout the history of sainthood are stories that sound less like religious biography and more like something out of science fiction or myth. Stories of people who levitated during prayer, who appeared in two places at once, who healed the dying with a touch, and who survived without water or food for years. Some even who glowed with light or walked through fire. So today, we're digging into the question, did some saints have superpowers?
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, pal.
Hey, man.
How we doing?
How goes it? Oh, man, I'm excited about today's show, man, like I typically am, because I don't know. This reminds me of the kind of stuff that we used to talk about in the tour van late at night, driving across the country. Mm-hmm. But before I think we dive into these really, I guess, amazing stories of some of these saints, I know that, well, first let me just say this. It's important, I think, to note that both Tyler and I are not Catholic. Mm-hmm. And so we definitely don't, want to offend any hardcore Catholics out there by, talking about this so lightly, or I guess our angle and approach to this. The main thing is we just think this is extremely fascinating. Both of us have been fascinated by the Catholic Church. My mom's side of the family, all of them Catholic. Yeah. So, we're not trying to take any kind of, I don't know, man. We just don't want to offend people, okay? So if you're Catholic and this offends you, we're society.
Yeah, we're like, especially for our longtime listeners, this is a topic that we're viewing maybe a little less in a serious, sort of ultra spiritual manner. We're kind of looking at this as like, as a kid with that wide-eyed wonder of like, wow, like this saint could bilocate. This saint could levitate. Like, it's all just stuff that, we would have also been fascinated with as kids.
For sure.
So,
but also, before we dive further into those mysterious stories, I also kind of want to just talk about, at least from my surface level knowledge, just about saints in general, because I think that's something that also fascinated me growing up and just in general. I mean, both of us have worn saints around our neck for the last 20 plus 30 years or so.
Yeah.
And it was just, we had a St. Christopher hanging up in our van, like on a rearview mirror. And so, hey, this is just something that's interesting. So one thing that I always kind of wondered was, well, who exactly was the first saint, And I think the answer kind of depends on like how you define that. If we're talking chronologically, the first saint could be considered Saint Stephen, who was a deacon in the early Christian church known for his powerful preaching. He's kind of widely recognized as the first Christian martyr because, so his story is told in the Acts of the Apostles, chapters 6-7, I believe, where he gets stoned to death for proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah.
Right.
Now, it's an interesting concept nowadays to just think about that. Imagine like just being killed for something that you believe. I don't know. It's just wild.
Yeah.
He's actually, I guess, celebrated annually in many traditions the day after Christmas, so December 26th, which is, pretty interesting. Yeah. It's on feast day. So I say, typically that's who people, from what I could research, consider to be one of the first saints. But you got to think about, what about the apostles? Some people argue that the apostles, especially Peter, James, or John, were the earliest saints in a more broad sense. They were close to Jesus, not only in proximity, but in relationship. They spread the gospel, and most of them were martyred.
Yeah.
However, because they were the foundation of the church itself, they weren't formally canonized because that process didn't exist yet.
Right.
And technically, if we're just talking about sheer proximity to Jesus and traditional sainthood and stuff, I mean, arguably the Virgin Mary is venerated above all other saints anyway.
Yeah.
But again, her status kind of transcends that typical canonization model that we see now.
Which, if we're talking about Mary, I have a fascinating little rabbit trail that I went down in the research.
Well, let's talk about that after we dive into, because I want to let's get into some of these saints with superpowers. I mean, it's crazy because even some of the sort of less superpower-like stories, still there are some miraculous, sort of mysterious things that are associated with some of these saints anyway.
Right?
You and I, when we were kind of talking about doing this topic, we were both talking about right there in the one that's just like laying there preserved.
Oh, well, I think there's St. Bartholomew.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's like Padre Pio.
Yeah.
And there's a couple like around Pope John. There's Pope John the 23rd.
Okay.
And Saint Rita of Cascia and Padre Pio are the ones that they're displayed in glass coffins.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't even know that Pio was one of those.
Yeah,
cool.
And it's because purportedly it's due to their incorruptibility,
right?
Remaining in good condition despite death. And I got to tell you, I've seen it in person.
Same, yep.
And it's a weird feeling, man. And it's kind of weird.
Yeah. Real quick, just before we get into this, and just sort of on a personal sort of opinion, what are your thoughts on that? Like what is it called?
Like, do I think it's a miracle that they're not decomposing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe they use some sort of old school, I don't know, man. But I mean, I saw it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I did too.
And it's like, they're not rotten. But, this is where we're already going to be potentially diving into conspiracy or conspiracy theories, because does that glass coffin have some sort of, I don't know, man, air condition. I mean, just some sort of controlled environment that a typical casket wouldn't.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not sure.
Well, and I've always thought, is it something to do with almost like a mummification type, it's sealed,
right,
something like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Because Pope John the 23rd, he's been there since 1963. And, my thought is, if I was looking at any one of us in a glass coffin being dead for that long,
yeah,
that we would be, pretty gross looking.
Well, St. Teresa supposedly was opened for the Well, it was opened in 1750. I guess so she originally died in 1582, and then they opened her several times, and every single time. So I guess that debunks what I just said as far as it being like some sort of, like oxygenated, like seal, that keeps them preserved. But no, these have been opened several times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to define what incorruptibility means in the Catholic belief, it basically is that if a body does not decay after death, then the person is holy.
And this also shows our Catholic ignorance. But does that mean that there have been several saints that, maybe they weren't saints until they sort of passed this test of incorruptibility? I'm not sure.
No, because I think there's multiple ways to be.
Oh yeah.
Canonized.
But I'm saying I wonder if like there has been a saint that like maybe wasn't, what is it called when they make them a saint?
Canonized.
Or yeah. Maybe they weren't canonized before, but then they see that, that they're after death, their bodies are incorruptible. So it's like, oh well, they had to be a saint.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe so. All right, let's talk about these that sort of are even more fascinating and miraculous than, well, I mean, that's kind of rude, right? Than not decaying after you die. But the ones that really captured our attention initially when we started talking about this. So first, I'm going to talk about St. Joseph of Cupertino. This one is called or known as the Flying Saint.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about a few stories claiming St. Joseph of Cupertino flew in private or just for a few people. We're talking about him regularly flying in front of large groups of people.
He was like the David Blaine.
Right. And whether it was during Mass or liturgy of the hours, or just at the mention of the name of Jesus or a saint, Joseph would involuntarily go into ecstasy and start levitating.
Yeah, that's really cool.
This apparently happened once during a public procession in front of the whole town, and once even during an audience for the Pope himself. His constant, uncontrollable levitating actually became a problem. His religious superiors deemed the phenomenon disruptive, and then at the end of his life, he was transferred to different monasteries and kept in cells by himself.
Yeah.
But he kept on levitating at the name of Jesus anyway.
Yeah, I've always thought this was an interesting one because, I don't know, not to be offensive to our fellow Catholics here. Well, not fellow Catholics because we're not Catholic, but our fans or friends or family here that may be Catholic. It has always bugged me that you have this guy who is, it's like he was levitating and flying, but then I guess it became like a problem because it sort of disrupted sort of the status quo. So they kind of hid him under a bushel, if you will.
Well, and I wondered too, it's like, it's sort of like, I'm trying to think what I would relate it to. It's sort of like it's distracting people. People are coming to the church maybe.
Oh, I see.
To see him
just
do
to
this
see him.
as a performance, Yeah. And then rather than, for the importance of, being at church and going through the motions and all that.
I mean,
maybe that's why.
Maybe it also kind of stems on the same concept of, it talks in the Bible about how we shouldn't become obsessed with angels or like sort of the works of God instead of God. It's like you're sort of deifying the side characters instead of the main character.
Yeah, you're starting to worship him
right
instead.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. I can see it turning into almost like a circus attraction. You're just going to church just to see this guy.
Well, some quick, interesting facts about his life, because anytime I hear stuff like this, I'm like, well, when did they, and to me, this is important context, when did they live, Was there technology that existed that would allow for some trickery?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he lived between the years of 1603 and 1663. So he was 60 years old when he passed away.
God, man.
He was born in Cupertino, Italy, and his parents and his family were like extremely poor. His dad actually died before he was born, and his mom was just, extremely poor. He was he was born in a stable. And reportedly in his childhood, he began to experience visions, and these visions kind of continued throughout his life. He was, of course, mocked often because of these times of ecstasy. And he was also known to have a volatile temper.
And by the way, like, I know that the terminology for like ecstasy in sort of modern language is a little different, but in reference to what we're talking about, it's almost like a sort of communion between you and God kind of thing. Almost like a trance, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
That's how I envisioned it in my mind. Yeah, sort of like this trance. Maybe he's like moving around kind of crazy. But eventually he ended up becoming an ordained priest in 1628 and served at this like shrine. During this time, these mystical experiences increased, and I mean, several sources. Remember what I said earlier on, to become a saint, it's this process, right? The Catholic Church has this broad team that investigates claims, evidence, all this kind of stuff to officially canonize them.
Right.
And several sources testified that he would levitate during the celebration of the Mass and the divine office. And because of this disruption, crowds, like we said earlier, came to see him. And so that's, I think, why they kind of shuttered him away.
Yeah.
So anyway, pretty interesting, man.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Yeah, so next up, I have one that would fit right in on the X-Men, and that is Christina the Astonishing. And she was known as the Saint of Indestructibility. Though she is not officially a canonized saint in the church, she was considered a saint in her own lifetime in the 12th and 13th centuries, and has some pretty interesting stories nonetheless, all of which display the fact that she was basically indestructible. For starters, she appeared to die of a seizure in her early 20s. Her body was prepared for burial, and a funeral was held. But in the middle of the funeral, she got up, full of energy. She said she had a supernatural experience in heaven, hell, and purgatory. She told her family and friends the sole reason she had returned was to suffer for the relief of those in purgatory and for the conversion of sinners still on earth. This is when things get real crazy. First, she fasted and deprived herself of any bodily comforts pretty severely, but that wasn't enough. She also would regularly throw herself into burning furnaces, but leave them without any burns. In the dead of winter, she would go swimming in a nearby icy river, sometimes staying in the water for days or even weeks at a time. Sometimes she would even allow herself to be sucked into a mill that was operating on the river and would be whirled around by the mill wheel. She would also allow herself to be ravaged by dogs or would go running through thorns. But through all of these things, she would always come away unscathed. Despite all of these things, she would actually live to be 74 years old.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Man, that is really crazy. Now, this is going to be a question off the record here. What do they mean by ravaged by dogs?
That's the first one I thought too. It's like, oh, here's some wild dogs. Come at me, bro. And you just jump in the middle? I don't know.
Anyway, man, that is, I love that, like, just like you said, man, she would fit into the X-Men.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I mean, I just rewind back into the 12th and 13th centuries, how wild it must have seemed. And it's interesting to me too, because this is the first female on the list.
Yeah.
And I feel like it would be pretty easy to just be like, witchcraft, burn her at the stake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also wonder, because it said that she actually wasn't an official sort of canonized saint.
Okay.
And I do wonder, not to throw shade, but I do wonder if some of that had to do with
being a lady.
Being a lady.
Maybe.
Yeah.
While I talk about this one, I'll let you kind of look up how many female saints are there. Okay. So the next one we're going to talk about.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler, and you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now back to our show. So this is also timing-wise in terms of, our earthly timeline here. It's pretty interesting. So this is a story about Saint Catherine of Alexandria. Saint Catherine was a princess in Egypt in the 3rd century and received a pretty good education. But she was raised as a pagan. When she was a teenager, around the age of 14, she said that she experienced this moving vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus. And that's when she decided to become a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, this is Egypt, around 305, Alexandria.
Yeah.
Tough time to be, a Christian.
Yeah, big time. Also, I recant what I said because the Catholic Church recognizes approximately 785 female saints.
Man.
So,
well, and now we're talking about St. Catherine, so there you go.
yeah.
So although she was just a teenager, she was very intelligent and gifted and well-educated. And when the emperor at the time, the Roman emperor, Maxentius, began persecuting Christians, she actually went to him to denounce this cruelty and tell him to stop. Rather than order her execution, he actually summoned 50 orators and philosophers to debate her. However, Catherine was moved by the power of the Holy Spirit and spoke eloquently in defense of her faith. And apparently her words were so moving that several of the pagans converted to Christianity on the spot.
Oh, that's cool.
But the sad part is they were immediately executed.
Jeez.
So, kind of a rough day, but I guess they made it to heaven.
We did it.
Yeah. So, unable to basically defeat her or to even intimidate her into giving up her belief, the emperor ordered her to be tortured and imprisoned. So she was arrested, tortured, but still, despite all of that, she didn't abandon her faith. So word of her arrest and the power of her faith kind of quickly spread throughout, and she actually ended up having over 200 visitors. According to some of the legends, the emperor's own wife, Valeria Maximilia, was converted by Catherine.
And then immediately killed.
Dude, the emperor eventually executed his own wife over this conversion, not joking.
Gosh.
I will say where I found this, it says it's not mentioned in historical record and it might be legend, but it's believed that Maximilla was alive and with her husband at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, years after the death of Katharina. But one other thing is the emperor made a final attempt to kind of persuade Catherine, who was said to be very beautiful, to abandon her faith and kind of saving her from her fate, so to speak, by proposing to marry her. That would have made her a powerful empress.
Right.
She would have never needed anything. She would have had everything that she could ever wanted, but she refused in saying that she was married to Jesus and that her virginity was dedicated to him. So he ordered her to be executed on a breaking wheel. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with that, I don't know if I would Google it and have that in your search history kind of thing, but essentially imagine just being, it's just bad torture.
Yeah.
All right? It's an ancient form of torture, basically, where your limbs are kind of threaded among the spokes of this big wheel, and an executioner comes by and kind of shatters things with a heavy rod. So It's terrible.
Which, man, I mean, it really does just go to show just sort of the ego associated with, like, you know, specifically this Emperor Maxentius or whatever. It's like kills his own wife because she converts, then, you know, proposes to, you know, Catherine, and then she says no, and it's like, all right, well, my only other option is to completely torture you to death.
Right.
It's just wild, man.
Man, super, like, what a jerk. But check this out, man. This is where the miracles kind of happen here.
Okay.
And this seems like something straight out of like a sci-fi movie / Star Wars here.
Mm-hmm.
When Catherine was presented before the wheel. Now, keep in mind, too, everyone's sort of, at this time, aware of these devices.
Right.
You know? I mean, tons of people would come and witness these types of things. This was their,
I was going to say, it was like
HBO Sunday night, I guess.
Right.
And so they bring her to this thing. She touches the wheel, and the dadgum thing shatters.
Oh, that's awesome.
So now he's even more mad, right? Because he can't torture her. He can't get the pleasure of the pain that he was going to inflict on her, slow pain, slow death.
Yeah.
And so he just basically simply orders her to be beheaded.
Yeah.
Which, you know, of course, he was successful at ending her life in that way. But there are some other accounts and claims, one being that angels took her body to Mount Sinai. And, you know, there's, I think in the 6th century, the Emperor Justinian ordered a monastery established in her name.
Justinian.
Justinton? No, it's Justinian.
Yeah,
Justinian.
Justinian.
Ordered him, didn't say it that way, and then he said, yeah, Justinian. Ordered a monastery established in her name, which still exists today. It's one of the oldest in the world. Around the year 800, a legend spread that her body had been found with her hair still growing and a constant stream of oil coming from her body. So she actually has a feast day, which is November 25th, and she is the patron of great many professions and causes, including students, unmarried girls, and all that. So pretty, I think a spiked wheel is a popular symbol often associated with her as well. So
interesting.
Kind of cool. I just imagine, or one of the cool things I imagine while reading that story is that moment where she like touches that wheel and it just...
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I think Zack Snyder could make that into a cool scene.
Yeah, right. All right, cool. Well, mine is similar to the story of Lazarus, if you guys are familiar with that. Lazarus was a friend of Jesus that was risen from the grave 4 days after he had died. And it's similar to Saint Vincent Ferrer, who was most famous for his missionary work, preaching, and theology. But he also had a supernatural ability. He could bring people back from the dead. And he apparently did on several occasions. According to the one story, Vincent entered a church with a corpse inside. In front of a number of witnesses, so packed out crowd, Vincent simply made the sign of the cross over the corpse, and the person just came right back to life. Yeah, which is, I mean, it's kind of amazing to think about. Like, I know that we're so used to this sort of trope in, like, you know, movies and stuff like that, but, like, just imagine, like, in real life this happening. It really is pretty insane.
I mean, I'll say, though, that I think a lot of us would see that in real life and just be like, no. I mean, I'm not trying to be, you know what I mean? For real, though, because it's so unbelievable.
Right.
Even like any of the miracles that occur in the Bible, we'd be like, something's going on. Where are the wires?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But then it's hard for us to put our mindset and perspective into that ancient world, man, you know? Because even then it would be even more mind-blowing. But, you know, I don't know. I don't want to digress too much because then it's like, how easy would it be for, you know, somebody that's good at tricking you to, you know, like if we went back in time, we'd be like, and check out this. And I'd do like the Michael Scott, like magic flame thing, you know, that he does in that cold open.
Yeah.
And like the magic wand that flips up with the flowers, but he does it so crappy that one time you see it happen.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No.
With the Office references, I think is what you're saying.
Which, by the way, like I know I've mentioned this
in
in the last few shows, but my daughter Amelia is like obsessed with The Office. So
That's awesome.
and she's 10. So Amelia, when you listen back, just know that
We love that you love The Office.
we love that you love it, but it was also highly inappropriate for your father
Yeah.
to let you watch it.
Probably so, yeah.
In another impressive story, Vincent happened upon a procession for a certain man to be executed by hanging for committing a grievous crime. Somehow, Vincent knew that the person was innocent, and he pleaded with the government officials, but to no use. Coincidentally, a corpse was being carried by on a stretcher. Vincent asked the corpse, "Is this man guilty? Answer me." The dead man immediately came back to life, sat up, and said, "He is not." The man then laid back down on the stretcher. When Vincent offered the man a reward for helping to vindicate the innocent man, the man said, "No, Father, for I am assured of my salvation." And so then he just died again.
Man.
Which kind of reminds me,
Dungeons and Dragons.
it's exactly like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speak with the dead. It's a spell that, it's in the new Dungeons and Dragons movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
Go ahead,
so good.
sorry.
No, that's it. That's it.
All the Catholics are out there going, God,
Yeah,
man, these guys.
Canceled. Yeah.
Oh, is that the end of the story? Okay, gotcha.
That's the one.
My bad. All right. We're going to wrap this part of it up with, talk about timely. If you're listening to this in the future, this is the same summer that the brand new Superman movie comes out.
Yeah.
And speaking of Superman, we're diving into Saint Padre Pio. Now, we mentioned him kind of earlier.
Yeah.
Because he's one of the saints that you can go and visit and see him in the glass.
Yeah.
In glass coffin. So he was a famous saint who lived in the 20th century. And he was really known for his piety and charity. And even the gift of stigmata.
Stigmata is where the bleeding of the hands and forehead.
Yeah. He had just about every superpower you can think of. There's even claims that he could bilocate. So in other words, be in more than one place at a time.
Yeah.
He could reportedly read people's minds.
Yeah.
And levitate and heal the sick.
Yeah, he kind of had it all.
He also could see guardian angels and reportedly spoke with Jesus and the Virgin Mary, even as a kid. He also came from a very poor family. And, again, speaking of things that are hard for, I think, people even listening to the show, because if you're listening to the show, that means you have means so far beyond what some of these people had that they wouldn't even be able to fathom it,
Right.
Because these folks their lifestyle and their station in life was such that their little children had to go and work to help support the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
God, it reminds me of that video I sent you last night where it's like, "Oh, you just learned long division? Cool, grab a shovel."
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, oh, education, you're reading about poetry?
Yeah.
Get over here.
Yeah.
Hold this nail for me.
Yeah.
So he spent many years as a young child tending, and hold on, let me just pause right there, because I think there are some things that generations of us, of course, it's easier for us looking down on other generations after us, kind of being like, ugh, you guys are lazy. But in a lot of ways, man, there's things that the hardships that some of these people had to face at such a young age taught them so much. So for example, St. Padre Pio, when he was young, he tended to a flock of sheep, and, he wasn't able to go to school. He had to, actually be around these sheep, making sure that they're okay, because again, that's his family's livelihood.
Right.
Whether it's the wool or anything, he had to make sure that there weren't any wolves or things that were going to get these things.
Yeah.
And so then imagine his parents' surprise. In late 1800s, he kind of expresses to them he wants to become a friar. And his parents actually traveled to a nearby community and asked the monks if he could join them. And despite his young age, they took him in. And check this out, man. And this is something that you don't really see also, man, because of when he was sort of around. In 1915, World War I is sort of afflicting the world. Padre Pio was summoned for military service. And so he left his tiny community of monks and drafted into medical service. At the time, though, he was often sent home, though, because he was so, he had some health problems of his own. And he would go home and then be recalled into service and all that. And finally, in 1916, he was dismissed because of his poor health. But there's just something about that, man, that just is amazing to imagine somebody that later becomes a saint being just sort of a quote-unquote normal person within a war. He's like a soldier in a war, man.
Yeah.
You know? And imagine him like in the trenches helping to heal people. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah,
what a cool visual. He began to notice in September of 1916 that he had this like really strong pain in his hands and feet. And that's when he noticed the stigmata. Yeah, the wounds of Christ appearing on his hands and feet. And, you know, he described the experience as extremely painful, bleeding occurred, but the wounds themselves smelled of roses. And although they continued to sort of weep, they never became infected.
Interesting.
And it said that doctors who later examined these wounds were amazed at their perfectly round shape.
Wow.
In 1919, people would come to visit him just to see these wounds. And he, again, was said to levitate and perform miracles. His popularity also became a source of concern for the church. And I guess there's a little bit of a pattern here, which is if something's detracting or distracting from the capital C church,
right,
they kind of try to push it to the side, and then much later, you know, it's recognized as, you know, I don't know, that it's okay.
Like
but
official.
Yeah, but here's what's cool, and I think maybe the difference between Padre Pio and the other saints, he was actually himself uncomfortable with the popularity and attention. And so the church investigated at the time, in real time, to investigate the stigmata and concluded that his condition was not faked. So by 1934, the Vatican began to change its attitude towards him. And again, he was allowed to perform his public duties. And so he was allowed to preach. And the Pope Pius XI encouraged people to visit him.
Yeah, it sounds similar to what we were talking about with the our first example, to where, you know, he was levitating and they saw that, like, oh, this is becoming a distraction. So they kind of, you know, hid him away.
Yeah. And, you know, that whole like bilocation thing, I mean, him being in more than one place at once, or at least two. Some people reported that when asked about that, he once said, I can do three things at once: pray, confess, and go around the world.
That's so cool.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Another famous quote that he would say, which I think is just really cool, especially if you're a religious person at all, is pray, hope, and don't worry. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's very much like this guy. I mean, I think there were actually a few examples of people that could do sort of the bilocation, and it really feels a little like you're sort of like early sort of occultist, like Helena Blavatsky and like some of those people, to where they were, you know, sort of these enlightened being kind of things, and that was a big thing with those people too, is like the bilocation, and it's almost, I don't know, to me it almost reminds me of like a type of like astral projection kind of thing, you know. So it's like, is he really, you know, is his mind technically in both places, or is he just sort of physically like appearing in one place, but then, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. So what you're saying is he physically, like, is his body able to be in more than one place at once, or is he somehow projecting himself into another location to where he looks like he's physically there? Or one that I thought of just now, is he projecting himself into the other people's minds to where it looks in their mind like he's there in front of them?
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Here's another thing that he said that I read, and I just think this is really cool. Not to get too religious or anything, but I don't even think you have to appreciate these words. So he said, Don't let temptations frighten you. They are the trials of those souls whom God wants to put to the test when he sees them strong enough to sustain the battle. Weaving with their own hands the crown of glory. Up to now, your life has been that of an infant. Now, I guess when these trials come up, the Lord wants to treat you as an adult. And as the trials of adult life are much greater than those of an infant, this is why you find yourself rather disorganized in the beginning. But the soul will acquire its calm, and the calm will not delay in coming. Be patient a while longer, and everything will work out well. Now,
it's cool.
These are the types of things that you don't want to hear when you're in the middle of the poop storm.
Yeah.
But much like and I love that he was a friar, and a lot of these folks started so humbly in life.
Yeah.
Monks, very poor. I feel like in the same way as like a Buddhist monk or people that come from meager means that spend their life studying any religious belief, and really just sort of exploring their faith and stuff. I feel like they have such profound wisdom that it sort of transcends a lot of the, I guess, barriers of the belief system that they're within. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
We will return after these messages.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
All right, here we go.
New Phineas and Ferb is here.
We're back, baby.
For 104 more days.
I know what we're gonna do today.
Of summer vacation.
I am ready for summer shenanigans. Let's do it. Oh, yeah.
All right. We're gonna bust Phineas and Ferb once and for all.
Are we gonna do this again?
New inventions, shenanigans, innators, adventures, and songs.
Brand new summer vacation.
New Phineas and Ferb starts June 5th on Disney Channel and next day on Disney Plus. On DisneyPlus.Disney.com.
Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Save $100 on the Craftsman V20 6-tool Power Tool Combo Kit, now at $199. No matter what the project is, Craftsman's high-quality, high-performance products empower you to build on. Stop by your nearest Lowe's store and check out the full line of Craftsman tools today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
This episode is brought to you by Chevy Silverado. When it's time for you to ditch the blacktop and head off-road, do it in a truck that says no to nothing. The Chevy Silverado Trail Boss. Get the rugged capability of its Z71 suspension and 2-inch factory lift. Plus, impressive torque and towing capacity thanks to an available Duramax 3-liter turbo diesel engine. Where other trucks call it quits, you'll just be getting started. Visit Chevy.com to learn more.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show.
And I've also always thought that was cool. I mean, I think being a kid of the 80s, like we are, I mean, you the 70s, but me the 80s.
Come on.
We were sort of like, it was sort of ingrained in us, that idea of these monks who, it's like they sort of shied away from modernity. And instead of, kind of going outwards, they sort of turned their focus inward. And in doing that, it would give them obviously like a stronger connection to God, or, depending on whatever belief system they were in.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something to that. It's like turning your focus in instead of like out, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
I think it's cool.
Well, and I think human nature, it's a lot easier for us to not just blame, but sort of place our frustration and fear and everything on something else rather than tackling it dead on.
Right.
Not to get too philosophical here, but I just feel like that's, you know, I don't know, it's impactful. It's pretty cool. Beyond the fact that, you know, this guy could levitate and all that, you know, all of these saints, when I think about it and like witnessing these levitations or all this, I mean, what's going on here, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's almost like, did these people, like, did they get, you know, quote unquote, when we say like powers or like superpowers, did they already sort of innately have these things and then they were almost like kind of activated through faith, or is it completely just given by God? Which, I mean, I am I'm a believer, so I'm of the belief system that, like, you know, like the Holy Spirit and through sort of those type of, you know, gifts of the Spirit, you know, biblically talk about, you know, we're sort of given these things. And so that's where I lie, which is probably could be kind of surprising to some. But yeah, I think some of these people, and it's also said in several places where these saints would talk about, you know, they kind of downplay these abilities. And they're like, well, you know, I'm able to do this in a particular time where I need to do this. You know, it's almost like they view it as like, you know, in the moment, God gives them this gift to do this, you know, said thing. And I think that's pretty cool.
It always makes, you know, you mentioned David Blaine, right? And I'm not saying that he deserves to be a saint. Obviously, there's some sort of something going on there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
his levitation.
He sold a soul to the devil, for sure.
Okay. You know, speaking of what I was talking about earlier, with one of the, who was it, St. Catherine or something, everybody's like, well, they can do this, devil.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm not saying that he should be a saint. I'm just saying, do you think we're ever going to find out how he did it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one thing that I am a little amazed with, and you folks just heard it in real time, but like the fact that the Catholic Church recognizes 785 female saints, like how does that?
Well, I mean, I'd say in a lot of, I mean, out of a lot of churches, I guess females hold a lot of stature within the Catholic faith, you know? I mean, you got your nuns, you've got...
I mean, Mary is kind of the main...
Yeah.
You know, one of the main focuses. No, I'm just saying, like, it's interesting to me that's a thing, but then, you know, the witch trials and a lot of that stuff, it's
right.
like...
Well, that wasn't Catholic. That wasn't Catholicism.
It was like a Protestant
thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then, you know, let's not dive down then you've got like the Inquisition and speaking of torture and stuff in the name of, so in the Crusades and all that kind of stuff, you know, also it's just an example of how humanity, when left with the, I guess, any kind of authority, humans are going to mess it up. Is the bottom line. And I think that's what's happened with so many denominations, we'll say, you know, eventually. But going back to like some of these miracles, I mean, like so St. Vincent, that's astonishing to me. You know, is this man guilty? The guy wakes up. I mean, just imagine.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. It's hard for me to not just immediately think that I would just be extremely skeptical. Is nowadays, right? Because like, do we hear about these kind of things now?
No.
You know? And is that, I mean, so arguably I'm sort of wearing both hats as skeptic and also someone arguing with the skeptic. So I'm like, I'm bilocating myself here. Someone could say, well, we don't see those now. Well, arguably, if you're like strong in faith, you could say, well, that's because, you know, the world as a whole, it's more difficult to have the strong faith that people had back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so maybe that's why we don't see it as often. And then the skeptic could come back and say, well, maybe those people were just more gullible back then. Which is a fair argument.
And both can be true at the same time.
Right, right, exactly. I mean, that's the reason why we talk about this all the time too, where, you know, someone looks up at the sun, they're like, I mean, it comes up, it does, you know, it comes up, it rises in the sky, it gives us heat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
It always reminds me when C-3PO is with the Ewoks and they think he's a god, and he just like pops up out of the woods and they're like, oh man. And then Luke makes him float and they're all like scared and stuff.
Yeah, which is amazing. I mean, and it kind of reminds me of the cargo cult thing that we've talked about where, you know, in the Amazon rainforest, you know, a U.S. like, you know, military plane crashes. But it also has a ton of like food and supplies on it. So, you know, 50 years later or 20 or 30 years later, you know, we come upon this tribe in the Amazon rainforest and they have like these symbols that are basically military patches. And they've revered this as like, oh, this was a gift from our God because he brought us food. Yeah, it's fascinating. But yeah, no, I do think that like I said, I think both can be true. I think that people were a lot more sort of naive. You know, there wasn't that kind of jadedness that we have now. I mean, even young kids are like, oh, I've seen it before. You know, I've seen, you know. But then at the same time, I also do think that because we didn't have all of the, you know, the modern comforts and all this stuff, I do think people just in general had their focus kind of inward a little more. And there was more of an emphasis on a sort of a personal relationship with God or personal relationship with like sort of the spiritual world. So yeah, I think both of those could be true for sure.
Now, this is something that popped in my head just now that, again, leans more on the skeptical side, and that is, I think the ability for these stories to turn in and become more embellished and
true.
Sort of like get these extra details during that time. And then sort of as the Catholic Church at that time started to notice that, oh man, people are putting a lot of attention to this, let's go investigate. Basically, they just sort of, you know, oh yes, for the benefit of the quote unquote church.
Yeah, the motives are right.
To show that,
there.
Kind of, yeah. And just to say, well, this kind of shows that miracles can happen, which will in turn, you know, bring more belief to this system. And so maybe that's why they sort of adopt these things. Now that's, again, just something that popped in my head as a like a theory of skepticism. The other thing I thought of, if we want to talk about theories, so this isn't really like a theory, but I just think it would be kind of cool. So a while back, I read this book. Of course, I can't think of the name.
Oh boy,
but it's by Manly Wade Wellman.
His detective. Oh no, the science fiction one, right? Yeah, I haven't read that one.
Oh, it's called Twice in Time by Manly Wade Wellman. You haven't read that one because that's the only one that I didn't give you. I gave you the other ones, the Silver John ones.
Yes,
you're welcome.
yes,
but
sir.
I wanted to keep this one selfishly.
Well, also, I think his sci-fi stuff was typically only really featured in like Fate magazine and those Strange Tales and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because there's two different ones within this. But the first one, it tells this story of a man who, let's just say, and I don't remember the year, but just picture like like a college kid, okay? Maybe even graduate level student in modern times. Discovers time travel, goes back in time, ends up in the Renaissance. And luckily for him, he was an art student, and so he was very good at art. It'd be like if you went back in time during the Renaissance, and you're just like, oh, and you just started drawing, and they'd be like, whoa, okay, you've got skills. And he ends up studying with people. He also is pretty innovative and all this kind of stuff. I don't necessarily want to spoil it for everybody, but it's one of the greatest short stories I've ever read.
I also wonder if this preceded. Do you remember the book in school, A Kid in King Arthur's Court?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I do remember that.
I think
and I don't know.
Kind of the same kind of vibe. I wonder this inspired that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But the way it ends, let's just say that, should I spoil it a little bit?
I mean,
who's going to go read it, man?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm not going to spoil it.
Just spoil it. I know you want to spoil it.
No. I don't even want to kind of spoil it.
The only people that would read it are Clay, and he's
probably already
read it for sure.
No, I'm not going to spoil it though. But just go look up this story. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought so anyway. You might be able to, I guess, figure out what's going to happen, but I went into it sort of not. I kind of wondered the whole time, and then at the end I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the bottom line is, the reason I bring that book up is it's been something that I was thinking about with these saints throughout history. Imagine, and it's because I tend to just lean on time travel as my overall theory about everything, but I think imagine how cool it would be 100 years in the future. We discover time travel. Mm-hmm. Tyler and I are still alive.
Yeah.
Mainly because I, run or do things daily. Tyler mainly because he stays indoors and he's just away from the sun.
Well, I'm also 16 years younger than you.
No, you're only like 1 year younger, as a matter of fact. And maybe not even a full year. Maybe it's just a few months.
Tomato.
Okay. So, where was I, man? So I'm thinking that these folks, I think it would be cool. I'm not saying, hey, this is what I think happened, but it would be a cool idea for these folks to be separately time travelers who are just fascinated by this period, who want to help people. Or maybe there's some sort of designated time, like maybe you can only time travel within a certain sort of static period. You know what I mean? It has to be exactly, 2,500 years from the time that you're traveling.
Yeah, like the clock tower. It has to be perfect conditions.
Well, no, I just mean like you can only, in other words, you can't go back further. So no matter what, if you're going to time travel, if we time travel today, it's going to take us to 2,000 years from today. If I go tomorrow, it's going to be 2,000 years from tomorrow.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, these are some of the first ones, and they're just like, I'm levitating, and it's like really just somebody like doing the Michael Jackson toes, or the, Pee Wee Herman, it's something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how I managed to just be so sacrilegious in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
But I just think that would be a cool idea, if it wasn't supernatural, if it wasn't miraculous.
Well, I also, I'm sort of on the same line as you. Like, again, if you press me on it, because I am a believer, I would say that a lot of these gifts probably are given to these, pious, isolated monk type characters, who have this utmost sort of devotion to having a relationship and a connection with God. I think that a lot of the stuff is probably exactly just that. However, I do like the idea that in another time, these people would be the same as like your Mayan or Aztec or Olmec, like shamans or shamans. God, I'm so bad at that word. Shamans. They would be like medicine men. They would be, if they lived in the 90s, they would be like the indigo children. They would be, it's just these people that have these sort of abilities, And so I think it's interesting that like, did these people was it this innate kind of thing that was already in them? And so maybe it was like multiple things happening at once. Maybe like they already had these abilities and they were sort of dormant, but then through this sort of, procession of becoming closer to God, it sort of activated,
Yeah.
It's kind of like how we talk about, people nowadays that are maybe schizophrenic or maybe people that like hear voices and all this kind of stuff. Would these have been the same people that would have been, shamans or your quote unquote like holy person like back in the day because they could commune with the divine and God,
Yeah, I guess maybe if they're convincing. And you bring up a good point. Is it a situation where Well, I mean, because there's also monks in Tibet or
right.
Ancient Buddhist monks who could levitate and also have these things. So it's like, are these abilities? Well, a couple questions pop up. Are they specific to those people, and they just sort of discover through enlightenment and stuff how to, I guess, enhance them or use them, or do those abilities live within us all? And through that same sort of enlightenment and stuff, could we unlock those powers? Now we're starting to get,
I like that, yeah. Yeah.
Imagine the first time you levitate. I mean, scared.
Man. I mean, you know what is interesting?
Motion sick.
You would, it would not, it would last like one time for you, and then you're like, this just makes me sick. No, I did think about, when I was a kid, like having those dreams where I could do some kind of weird, like, it was like I could do this thing to where I would like have to breathe a certain way and like hold my breath for a couple seconds and then do this other thing, and it would allow me to like start like almost like my body was like filling up with air and I could kind of float. And then I've told like the other one where
wait, hold on.
What?
Maybe I misheard you here. You're saying that when you were a kid,
no, dreams.
You could take a deep breath.
No, I had dreams.
And then you would start to float. Okay.
Yeah, no, like flying dreams.
I was going to say, well, folks, we didn't intend it, but this happens to be our series finale.
Yeah. No. It, like the flying dreams, which a lot of kids have, which I do wonder if it's like kids of our generation, because I don't know that you hear much of that now, but it was weird. It was like this whole process. It wasn't like when I was a kid of just like, I just raised my hand and then I just flew like Superman. There was like this whole kind of like sort of, I don't want to say
like buttons to push and stuff. I mean,
I don't want to say like ritual, but it was like you kind of had to like slow your breathing. Then you had to take like a couple little breaths, then like one big one. And
just go ahead and try it right now, man. See if you pop through the studio.
I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it. And then I also had a very similar one where I would have these weird dreams where I was like in like a hotel or motel room. Remember, we've talked about this because this was actually the genesis for that book that we were going to write a long time ago. And it's like, imagine a hotel room that doesn't have a ceiling, but the ceiling is like around the edge of like the borders of the room. The room is filled with water, and you're like sitting on you're sitting at the edge of a pool, your feet dangling in. But instead of a pool below you, you look down and it's filled up with water, but it's a hotel or motel room. And really strange. I don't really know the point of that. But they always featured this, and then they would involve me like dropping into the room that was filled with water, and I would do this thing to where like my fingers would light up, and I would make these sort of gestures like on my like torso, like chest, stomach, and it would like rearrange my organs, which would allow me to basically breathe underwater. Because I was like changing sort of my physiology and anatomical kind of makeup or whatever. But I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's super cool.
Maybe if I devoted my life to being a monk.
Yeah.
It could.
Then you could
really
breathe underwater.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, I've had a few flying dreams. Most of them weren't really flying. They were more like falling.
Those are the worst.
Yeah. Or like I would fly and be like, oh, I don't like this,
Yeah. Well, that's part of it. It's like, they always just felt sort of like levitating. It never really felt like you had full control of the flying. Like there was never like a Superman dream. It was always this like, you're kind of at the mercy of like the wind, and like any minute you have this feeling like, oh, if I stop concentrating, or if I stop, doing this thing, then it's gonna, I'm just gonna fall, which would happen a lot.
Have I ever talked about the dream that I had where I went through, like I was in the cockpit of this commercial airliner, and it was crashing or something, and I just flew through the windshield, and I'm just like floating through there. I'm like, I got this, man, I got this.
What?
And they're like these giant, almost like, West Coast style pines just in the air. And I'm like, okay, if I grab it just right, I'll be able to grab onto this tree. And I do successfully. But then as I'm sliding down this thing, it gets wider and wider and wider and wider to where like now my arms are sort of further and further apart. And I'm like, I can't hold on, but I'm still so high off the ground. And then I woke up.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Huh. Did you ever have the dream where, or I don't know if it was like really a dream or if just sort of an idea of like, if I was crashing in a helicopter, I would jump out right at the last minute. And that would totally survive.
And that would work.
And it would work.
I kind of tested that theory out in real time when I was a kid and I was going down this really steep hill on a skateboard.
Uh-oh.
And it started doing the wah, 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 wah,
Oh, yeah.
wah, 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 wah. And I was like, okay, if I jump back enough, I'll be able to offset this speed.
Of course.
And when my feet hit the concrete, they just flew right out from underneath me.
Yeah.
And just bashed, knocked. You know, I also once had a dream that we were able to get through a podcast and stay on target.
All right. Well, before we go, and since we've already sort of given our exhaustive conclusions on what we think about these saints, I discovered in my research a couple things that I think are absolutely fascinating. Number one, I was kind of looking into the work of this lady writer who is one of my all-time favorites. I've listened to tons of podcasts with her in it. We have her books. Her name is Diana Walsh Pasulka. You may know her by her book, American Cosmic. And she really delved into, American Cosmic, for example, really gets into the world of ufology and this sort of the secret or the invisible college, they call it, which is like this group of like, people that kind of control a lot of this stuff around the world. It gets kind of heavy, but her inception into this kind of stuff was like the saints and these different sort of abilities. Well, one of the things that she brought up is this idea of these. Have you ever heard of these aerial toll houses or Telonia? So basically, because she started out her research, so she's like a scholar. Like I said before, she was really getting into, I think, sort of on the side of like the Eastern Orthodox Church, these kind of strange events like stigmata, like, a lot of the stuff we've talked about today. And she ran across, and she was also given access to the Vatican for her research into a lot of this stuff.
Which, can you imagine? I mean, that's not giving away like, Tootsie Rolls on Halloween,
Yeah, that's pretty serious. I mean, you know that they say that there's like 53 miles of bookshelves beneath the Vatican?
I mean, just imagine.
I mean, I'm pretty sure the Library of Alexandria is down there.
And maybe even the Ark of the Covenant.
Probably. Yeah. But she's talking about this idea that like, basically drawing a parallel between this concept in the Eastern Orthodox Church, this concept of like when you die, your soul leaves your body and is escorted to God by these angels. And during this journey, the soul passes through like an aerial realm, which is inhabited by like all these evil spirits and, what we would call like demons, I guess. The soul encounters these demons at various points referred to as toll houses, where the demons will attempt to accuse the soul of sin, and if possible, so it's basically trying to
make you think like you're being judged, but it's fake. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, it's kind of like a fake kind of thing. But in that process, there's this idea that like you're kept in this like little miniature house or this little container. So her thing was like, does this explain like some UFO sightings? Which is pretty fascinating on its own. Anyway, as interesting as that is, it then led me to this other thing, which I cannot believe that I've never heard of. But basically it's this. basically the overall, like I'm just going to give like sort of a 30,000 foot view. Basically, the house that Mary, the mother of Jesus, the house that she grew up in Nazareth, right, was, that's the house she grew up in, that her parents lived in, and also the house that they presume was where she received, the visitation with God, which is called like the Annunciation, and where, that's where she was given Jesus. Like, so basically Jesus was brought into her womb, right? This idea that angels basically transported this house to a small town off the Adriatic coast in Loreto, Italy. Have you heard of this?
I mean, I don't know. In some ways, it sounds familiar.
I have never heard of this. This like kind of blew me away. And what's crazy is, so here we go. So the Sancta Casa of Loreto is not impressive. It is a stone house with 3 walls and no foundation. It measures about 31 by 13 feet. And like I said, originally was built in Nazareth. The events that occurred in and around the house, however, are extraordinary. Tradition tells us that this is where Our Lady was born. It's the site of the Annunciation, like I said, and where the Holy Family would live for many years. We know that the early Christians revered this house as Mary's home. Saint Epiphanius, Saint Willibald, and the Venerable Bede all wrote about it. Later, Saint Helena even built a basilica over it. Saint Louis IV of France was the last saint to visit the Sancta Casa in Nazareth in 1251. Also, that is literally my lucky number, 1251.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, just before the fall of Jerusalem. So synchronicity abounds, 1251. St. Helena's Basilica was destroyed in 1263. This is where the story gets interesting. The Sancta Casa appeared in Italy as early as 1291. Legend says the angels carried the house from Nazareth to modern-day Croatia, then on to Italy. There's actually a detailed story about 2 brothers discovering the Sancta Casa and arguing over how to make the most profit over it. The house then disappeared out of Croatia and reappeared on a road next to a ditch in the town of Loreto off the Adriatic coast. There's this your sort of secular historians believe that a family called the Agili was responsible for bringing the house over by ship. But a lot of that story sort of falls apart. And again, I'm not saying that this actually happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen. But the interesting thing is archaeologists in the 60s actually did find the Sancta Casa stone is indeed from Palestine, as are minute bits of pollen found on the stone that only exist over there. There's also graffiti on the stone that matches graffiti in St. Helena's ruined basilica. Finally, the measurements of the remains of the foundation in Nazareth perfectly match the Sancta Casa. So in Nazareth still are the foundation of this house.
Man.
It matches to the inch.
Dude, so no matter what, it's like no matter how it got there,
right?
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, how crazy is that, though? That's so wild to me.
That is, and the only sort of possible, hey, it wasn't angels that,
right,
picked it up and flew it over.
Yeah.
Is that just somebody decided
to... Yeah, which is odd because, like, part of the reason that a lot of that, the Ageli, A-G-E-L-I, that's supposedly like the family that could have brought it over. So apparently they were a wealthy family and, but the problem is there's no way back then that we're talking like 1200s. So there's no possible way that you would be able to keep this house exactly as is, all in one piece, put it on a boat, ship it over, take it off in one piece, because as of now, like I said, it goes down to like the inch matching the foundation, the width and everything, the height and the width, like everything perfectly matches from the foundation to the house in Italy.
Man.
It's just
maybe
crazy.
Maybe one of these saints.
I mean, maybe
has super strength.
Yeah, maybe. But man, I thought that was such an interesting.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. If you have your own story or you are yourself a superpowered saint, we'd love to hear about it. You can do so over on our Instagram. Drop us a line. Shoot us a DM if you have a more long story. If it's even more long form, shoot it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better, we'd love to hear it in your voice where you could possibly make That Would Be Rad history. And we're probably going to have a show coming up in the next few episodes featuring listener stories because those are our favorites. So if you have your own listener story, it doesn't have to be in your voice. You can just write it out and we'll read it. But if you would like to hear your voice with like really cool sound design and, the works, we'd love to hear it. And you can do so with our voice memo feature over at thatwouldberadpodcast.com. If you want to support the show, leave a 5-star review on whatever podcatcher you use. Tell a friend about the show. And the biggest way is become a Patreon supporter to the Rabbit Trail, which is our Patreon. It's, more of what you love. We do our best to put out at least 1 or 2 extra shows per month. And it's just a way to kind of show your support in real time and keep this train on the tracks. It means a ton to us. And also, we just want to thank everybody who has told that friend about the show or has given a 5-star review because it really does help a lot, and we really do appreciate it. What do you got? Anything else?
I think that's it, man.
Right on. Well, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted.
There are stories. Said it weird. There are stories.
I'm doing a podcast. Love you.
Love you.
What are y'all doing?
Nothing. Is the podcast actually on?
Yeah, I'm recording right now.
Am I in it?
Yeah,
You're in it.
Okay.
Love you.
All right. All right.
Oh, man, we did it.
We did it. Dude, how crazy is that, though, about the house?
Yeah, no. I can't believe we never heard of that. But, I wonder how many things there are like that.
Yeah, right.
We can go 43 years without knowing that.
Yep. I totally agree.
I mean, we're still going to be doing this when we're like 80, so we got another 43 to go.
We're like, can you believe it?
Not at one time.
Never heard of it. We're just...
When I was...
we're just repeating. We're like...
Yeah.
We've had like 6...
Let me ask you a question. You ever heard of this thing? It's a hairy creature. They call them big feet.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah, we have like 10 episodes on Sam the Sandown Clown.
Yeah.
And every time
this is a good one. I'm telling you, buckle up and get ready for it. This is exclusive to our show.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shh.